Again, our thanks to Bank of America for its support. I actually had another life. I am the current chair of the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, but when I was practicing law at King and Spalding, and the senator was one of my law partners, he hit upon the idea that we ought to be focused on what was then called information security. Cyber had not yet been invented, apparently, but the fact was, the issue was one that had been of great interest to him sitting in the Senate. In fact, I think he had dragged our colleague Tom Nunn up to draw pictures to show how many thousands of doors and windows there were that were vulnerable in 1995. So by the time we had the first of the forums that Peter Freeman organized, and I was sort of the senator's bagman in the effort, we were really focused on how Georgia Tech ought to get into this space. And it wasn't that they hadn't done anything about it, but bringing the spotlight to focus on it was one of the functions of this forum. And so it was the senator's suggestion that here in the 20th year, it's appropriate to look back at where we were, where we are today, and frankly, what the threats of the future are. We have been migrating for some time, basically from when my son was in the early hacker vision, that is it possible? That was the motivation, to then whether or not it could be done for profit in various forms, to whether it can be done for political ends, and frankly, where we are now with persistent nation-state threats that give capability that is of real uncertain implementation. And so our ability to protect the perimeter is only one aspect of it, and the cultural aspects of it, starting with phishing responses at the computer terminal and focusing on the differences in people's sense of privacy on the use of their information, big differences between what's the GDPR it requires now in Europe and what American customers are very comfortable doing with their CVS cards, and how that data gets used. And the problem is to be amplified by the onslaught of artificial intelligence, which consumes and requires a great deal of data to really be useful. So when we think about this problem, it's going to become one in which there's going to be an inseparable line between security and privacy and the permitted uses of information. So I think this gives us an opportunity today to have an extraordinary panel. And I thought it would be entirely appropriate to call upon the senator who really started this thing. He requires no introduction to this crowd. But I will just tell you that in the time that I've had the privilege of working with him, there isn't anybody who has been more focused on the major threats to this country, whether they be nuclear, whether they're being cyber or data, and military preparedness, than the senator from Georgia. My friends, Senator Nunn.
I didn't develop any rhythm at Georgia Tech, so thanks, Joe, and thanks to all of you for being here. And Andy, where's Andy? Thank you for the great kickoff. That was a terrific presentation, and I am excited about the forums that we're going to have and the speakers we're going to hear from, because we've really got an outstanding group of panelists. Let me start by thanking, as Joe did, Wendy Stewart and the Bank of America. We've had a partnership for now like 22 years. We started these forums, rotating them each year between the University of Georgia, Emory, and Georgia Tech the first 6 years, and since then we've had a forum every other year at Georgia Tech. So that's the pattern we're in now. But it's been a very important, I think, kind of series for the subjects we've taken and the people that have participated, and the educational aspects of it, as well as the incentive for Georgia Tech and other schools to really dive in on these issues, because the government alone obviously is not going to solve them. If probably one message that comes out today is going to take all sorts of partnerships to address this. So Wendy, thank you, and all the Bank of America folks for making it possible. Peter Swire, thank you so much, Peter, for your outstanding leadership in putting this forum together. And we are very blessed to have you at Georgia Tech. Peter was the first person in the U.S. government who had responsibility for privacy throughout the government. That was back in the Clinton administration, and You add a great dimension here at Tech, and we're very proud to have you. And Sandy Winterfeld, you'll hear from Sandy in a few minutes, but we're very proud to have Sandy here. We actually had Sandy, four-star Admiral, and Philip Breedlove, who is sitting right back of him. They're still almost roommates. They roomed together at Georgia Tech, and Philip was a four-star Air Force general and headed up NATO. And of course, Sandy was the number 2 guy in the Pentagon, and so we've got both of them back. I don't think you all are rooming together again. That probably brings back too many memories, but in any event, we're delighted. And Sandy helped us put this forum together, so we're very grateful to you, and he'll be on the panel in a few minutes. And Joe, of course, grateful not only for your work on this forum, but for what you and Peter did 20 years ago in starting this whole series at Georgia Tech, and your leadership of the Nunn School. It's been terrific, and we're extremely grateful for it. I'm very proud of the role that Georgia Tech is playing in the cybersecurity arena. The Georgia Tech Information Security Center, GTISC, I thought I'd gotten away from all those initials when I got away from the Pentagon, but still with us in academia. But that Information Security Center basically dates back to the forum we held 20 years ago and has grown into, as Peter mentioned, the Institute for Information Security and Privacy, and we're proud to co-host the event with that outstanding group today. You know, when you look at where Georgia Tech is today and the role being played, it's really an extremely important part of this overall effort in our nation. Tech hosts 13 cybersecurity-related labs and centers, has over 600 cybersecurity researchers, engages in $144 million in sponsored research in this arena, offers 12 degree paths for cybersecurity professionals, and has, I don't know how many cybersecurity courses, some say over 100, but depends on how you define it. But in any event, many cybersecurity courses offered here for our students. So Georgia Tech and GTRI are playing a huge role in this enormous challenge for our nation, indeed challenge for the world. One of our speakers at that forum in 1998 was General Robert Marsh, who headed a task force, and I was privileged to serve on that task force, that was appointed by President Clinton to analyze the cyber threat to our nation's infrastructure. That report laid out the challenges with these words, and this is 20 years ago. We must, quote, "We must learn to negotiate a new geography where borders are irrelevant and distance meaningless, where our enemies may be able to harm the vital systems we depend on without confronting our military power directly. National defense is no longer the exclusive preserve of government, and economic security is no longer just about business," end quote. Flash forward to the 2018 Defense Department cyber report. Came out recently, and it makes it clear that the cyber risk in the last 20 years has increased dramatically. And I quote from that 2018 DoD report: "Competitors are using cyberspace operations to steal our technology, disrupt our government and commerce, challenge our democratic processes, and threaten our critical infrastructure," end quote. How's that for a pretty sweeping threat? So cyber warfare does seem, as the program says today for the next panel, does seem to be the elephant in the room, which our next panel will discuss. Today we have outstanding experts on security, on intelligence, on technical, on business, and on policy aspects of the growing cyber challenge. We will examine both actual and potential nation-state attacks. We will explore the compelling need for a coordinated strategy to, first of all, deter where possible and to defend and respond by both our government and by the private sector, which owns most of the infrastructure on which both our security and our economy depend. The last assessment I got was 90% of the infrastructure is owned by the private sector in this country. The threat is not new, but it is growing at an exponential rate. The cyber attacks in social media that occurred in the 2016 election shined a very bright spotlight on the broad scope of cyber attacks, which even threaten the credibility of our democratic election process. Last week, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, an organization that I co-chair, issued a report on the existential nuclear threats, and Sandy was on that panel, that could be caused inadvertently or intentionally by nation states or even third-party cyber attackers. We began our report by quoting the Pentagon's Defense Science Board. This board warned in 2013, and I think this was one of the most underreported stories that I know of, certainly in the last 5 years. In 2013, the Defense Science Board said in unclassified form that our military commanders could face false warnings of attacks or could lose trust in their ability to control U.S. systems and forces, including nuclear weapons and related command and control and communication systems. Let me read that again. Our military commanders could face false warnings of attacks or could lose trust in their ability to control U.S. systems and forces, including nuclear weapons and related command and control and communicating systems. That's pretty stark. That's pretty sobering for those who have been involved in anything relating to the nuclear arena. This raises profound questions about nuclear deterrence itself and about strategic stability, not just with the United States forces, but also 8 other nuclear weapon states, including India and Pakistan, any one of which could be the weak link in the nuclear risk chain. So there is no shortage of challenges to discuss today, from the economy to national security. A few questions on my mind, and there'll be many others that come up. These are the ones that come to mind for me. Number one, does cyber warfare pose an existential threat? In particular, if you combine cyber attacks on nuclear facilities. Can we develop understandings with other nuclear weapons nations that attacks on command and control and early warning systems could cause nuclear war by mistake and must be off limits, even among adversaries? 2, can we develop a cyber deterrence policy that is effective to protect both our economy and our security? Can we deter attacks on our critical infrastructure, particularly by nation states, but not limited to that? And what are the big obstacles to effective deterrence? Number 3, does effective deterrence against cyber warfare depend on a cyber offensive response? Big question. When do you use it? What are the other tools that we can use to achieve cyber deterrence? Why did they not work in our 2016 election, or were they ever deployed? Number 4, is cyber deterrence by assured offensive cyber or kinetic response possible with our current attribution capabilities? And I was glad to hear that Georgia Tech is taking a deep dive on attribution. Is attribution likely to significantly improve, or is cyber offense and stealth by the attacker always going to have the edge over defense and retaliation? Number 5, what is the role of the private sector in all of this? What are the impediments to government-private sector effective cooperation? Number 6, and a very tough one, should U.S.-based companies be expected to assist the U.S. government? If so, what about the other question? What is the duty of U.S. companies doing business in China in response to China's request for assistance? Tough questions for American companies. My final 2 questions may be the most difficult, and they may cause all of us to squirm a little bit, but I hope we can really discuss them, because there's been some discussion on this, but not nearly enough in our country, and it's going to take a lot of discussion, these subjects, both in closed sessions with highly classified information, as well in open sessions where the policy side of it must be discussed, in my view. And these final 2 questions: is there any set of cyber understandings with other countries? I'm not saying treaty. I think treaty and verification is too tough a nut at this stage. But is there any set of cyber understandings with other countries to restrain offensive cyber attacks that we are willing to live with in terms of limiting ourselves? That's a tough one. My final question, David Sanger recently wrote an excellent book, which I read this last weekend, an excellent book about cyber, and it's titled The Perfect Weapon. He closes with a very provocative proposal about utilizing America's offensive and retaliatory capability with these words, quoting from that book: "The intelligence agencies insist on secrecy, but that would defeat the point. Our response to deter attackers needs to be very public as an American airstrike on a chemical weapons plant in Syria or an Israeli strike on a nuclear reactor." Continued quote, "Every time we respond quietly or not at all to an attack because we are worried about revealing the quality of our detection systems or the capability of our cyber weapons, we only encourage escalation and further cyber attacks from our adversaries," end quote. David poses a tough but I think crucial question. How much are we willing to reveal about our considerable offensive capabilities? And they are considerable. This requires a lot of thought, a 360-degree analysis. Some of it has to be classified, but some of it has to be debated in public. And that debate, I think, has to happen. And, of course, very careful consideration before moves are made in that direction. But I think the question is one that is very legitimate. There are many other questions that will arise in our discussions today. Now, I don't want anyone to think I expect our panelists or speakers to have all the answers for that set of questions. But given our excellent panels, I'm very confident this forum can contribute significantly to the national discussion and the debate, which frankly has not yet occurred. I was just talking to Cy Goodman, who's done so much in cyber, and he was basically saying he wished 20 years ago that people would pay as much attention as they seem to be paying now. But now that we do have attention, we've got to really bear down, particularly experts in this area. Finally, one other little bit of advice. I do hope that our panelists, particularly those who are blessed with technical brilliance, and I guess that assumes just about everybody, will use understandable terminology, particularly to dummies in the audience like me who are not cyber fluent. Let me give you a little illustration, a little history on that subject. Some of you may be familiar with this. It actually occurred. This is not fake news. The year was 1996. The forum, the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, United States Senate. The subject, cybersecurity challenges. The witness, John Deutsch, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The first question by Chairman Nunn. Mr. Director, you've used the word cyber throughout your testimony. Please give us your definition of the word cyber. I thought it was a rather straightforward question. Response from witness John Deutsch, who is usually, as all of you know him, very, very glib. The response, blank stare and painful silence. Then finally, these embarrassing words, Mr. Chairman, may I furnish that answer for the record? I thought this was simply another intelligence lapse until I received this letter the following week from Director Deutsch. Dear Senator Nunn, this is a direct quote from the letter. During last week's hearing on foreign information warfare capabilities, you asked a rather indelicate question. What does cyber mean anyway? I must admit that your query caused a great deal of discomfort here at the agency. While everyone had used the term, no one had heretofore felt any need to know precisely what it meant. In light of my promise to keep Congress fully and currently informed, I pressed for an answer. Continued quote from the letter. The CIA's research revealed that the term cybernetics was coined by the father of cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, in 1948. In Mr. Wiener's words, we have decided to call the entire field of control and communication theory, whether in the machine or the animal, by the name cybernetics, which we formed from the Greek kybernetes, or steersman. Department of State concurred with CIA's findings, but wished to point out that the Greek kybernetes is related to the Latin gubernator, meaning steersman or governor. The Defense Intelligence Agency is not yet ready to make a judgment, and it is exploring the possibility that cyber may have come from the Greek kybersteter or diver, from which we also derive the word cybister, or genus of large diving beetles. The director of the CIA closed his letter by saying, "Mr. Chairman, I hope this clears up any confusion." Of course it didn't, but I trust that we will today. Thank you very much.